Ողջունում ենք ձեզ եւս մեկ անգամ .NET Conf Armenia-ին միանալու արդիվ, հուսով եմ ձեզ դուր եկավ առաջին մասը, որ ունեցանք։ Հիմա ավելի հետաքրքիր մի բան ենք ունենալու, որտեղ ունենք հատուկ հյուր, այս մասը լինելու է անգլերեն լեզվով, հուսով եմ դա ձեզ համար խնդիր չի լինի։ Ուզում եմ ողջունեք բոլորդ, նախկինում Cloud Advocate, հիմա Cloud Project Manager, եթե չեմ սխալվում, քիչ անց ինքը իրեն ավելի մանրամասն կներկայացնի, ողջունենք Donovan Brown-ին, որը միացել է մեզ եւ ունենք մեծ հնարավորություն Hello Donovan. Thank you for I'm fine, and you?
I'm glad I'm still awake. I'm working on a project. It's like 2 a.m. here. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna work on this one thing. I'll go to sleep after, but I got it to work. So I'm like really excited and I'm all amped up, but I should be asleep. I'm so glad you pinged me and I'm still here.
We're so excited to see you. And you know, many of us who are watching right now were grown under your videos on Channel 9. So it is so exciting for us to have you here.
Oh,
Thank
very
you for
cool.
joining.
Oh, no, my pleasure. I'm just glad it all worked out because if I hadn't gotten the code to work, I probably would have gone to sleep. But luckily it worked and I got all amped up and excited.
Nice. Happy coincidence. Okay, so would you mind to introduce yourself for
Sure.
For those who didn't know you?
Yeah, sure. My name's Donovan Brown. I work at Microsoft. I currently changed roles. So on the 19th of January, I just became a partner program manager on the incubations team, which is why I'm up right now. We're getting ready for a big launch of a product called Dapper, and I'm working on a lot of the samples and demos we're going to be doing for that. Before that, I was a cloud advocate. So a lot of you might have seen me, like you said, on YouTube, on Channel 9, at Build, Ignite. I speak at a lot of major conferences for Microsoft. I did that for about 3 years. I was also the PM for DevOps. So if you look at Microsoft's definition for DevOps, I'm the guy that wrote that sentence about, 6 years ago now. And it's changed my career. That one sentence literally changed my entire trajectory for my career. And before that, I was a process consultant. So I've been around the industry for a long time, write a lot of software as I was doing tonight, and I know a lot about process. So happy to be here.
I believe that you have experience of about 30 years, no?
Yeah. I started writing software, probably 25, almost 30, because I started writing software professionally at Compact Computers. I live here in Houston, Texas, and right down the street, about 6 minutes from my house, is the old Compact Computers headquarters, which is now HP. And that's where I started my career back in '96. But I'd been programming, obviously, before I got a job at Compact.
Nice to have you. So this part of our event is about discussing the technologies, where it's going, where Microsoft is leading its technologies related to cloud, to .NET, to Visual Studio, and so forth. So what is your expectations, where technologies are going for maybe next a few years?
Yeah, it's still all cloud native, right? And we've all started to snap towards Kubernetes like there's no other option on the planet, right? So I spent all day today playing with Helm, which is a really cool way to be able to deploy your YAML files into your Kubernetes cluster without having to type kubectl apply, kubectl apply, kubectl apply a million times, and then realizing you messed up and then trying as fast as you can type a kubectl delete, kubectl delete, kubectl delete, right? You don't have to do that. You can actually just simply say Helm install and have a collection of all of the YAML files that you want, and they just go in and come out as a unit, right? But you can templatize them. So I've been spending a lot of time with that. Obviously, AKS or Kubernetes, however you're using Kubernetes, is really big. And the project I'm working on is Dapper, which many of you might not have heard of yet, but you're going to hear a lot about it in February when we launch officially 1.0. And what that's going to allow you to do is to write microservices much easier. Writing the actual microservice, that's easy because it's small and it does this one little thing. But when you try to deploy that microservice and you use it with everything else, that's when it gets complicated. How do I call other microservices? How do other microservices discover who I am? How do I save state? How do I store secrets? How do I use the actor pattern if I want to? How do I get all the telemetry that's being developed and produced by all the different microservices? How do I observe that and view that? Well, the cool thing is that Dapper does all that stuff for you. If you don't have Dapper, you're having to download other SDKs, you're having to figure out how to do this in every different language, and it just becomes really complicated. You're dealing with different vendors, different products, different everything. But with Dapper, you just have this sidecar that loads right next to your app. And whenever you need to call another service, you say, hey, Dapper, go call that service for me. It figures out where the service is, figures out what the URLs are. It does all the retries for you. It does all the backoffs for you. Like, your code is very simple. Go call that thing, deal with all the crazy hard stuff for me, and just give me my answer back. So obviously cloud native, cloud first, thinking on how you're going to develop your app. And again, on February 17th, you're going to hear a lot about the product I'm talking about now. And my entire team are all up late now, working on demos, getting the documentation ready, adding components for you so that whenever you use Dapper, everything that you need is going to be there for you.
And that's going to be a framework which you will add to your project, or it's something like with Azure?
Oh, so yes, you can actually use it anywhere. You don't have to be on Azure. You can use it on the edge. You can use it in the cloud, our cloud, or somebody else's. So we have other cloud providers that will announce on the 17th who are already using Dapper. So it's literally just a sidecar. So just think of it, if you have a pod with 2 containers in it, one of those containers is going to be that sidecar. And then you're going to have your image running in there. So a normal pod with Dapper has 2 containers in it, your container and then the sidecar. And then you're just talking to the sidecar all the time. You don't even worry about anything else that exists inside your Kubernetes cluster. Ask Dapper to do it for you. It'll take care of everything for you. It's really making microservices easy to write, which is awesome.
Oh, I see. Okay, so here is the question which is usually been asked when talking about microservices. When you should use microservices and when you should go with Monolight, how to choose between these two?
You need to make.
What would you say?
What I would say is that it's going to depend, right? Microservices are not the solution for everything. The monoliths exist for a reason, and sometimes that's going to be the quicker way to write. It's going to be less complicated. It depends on what you're doing. If you don't need to be able to scale up individual components without scaling up the rest, then why are you doing this, right? Like when I'm talking to someone about why they're going to microservices, my first question is, what problem is this solving for you that you have today? Let's use, for example, TFS, which is now Azure DevOps. Azure DevOps was designed as a monolith originally. So you would come and you would install Team Foundation Server on your physical hardware, and then you would use it. It was a monolith. When we moved it to the cloud, we moved it as is to the cloud, right, as a monolith. Now, what ended up happening is CI and CD became really, really popular. Because we had one big monolith, when we needed more CPU or more power for CI/CD, we had to duplicate the entire thing. All the work item tracking, all the source control, everything that we didn't really need. All we needed was more build and more release. We didn't need more of all that other stuff. So the problem it was solved for us is that if we could tease apart a microservice that did just the build and just the release, we could scale that up and down without scaling up the rest of this application. So for us, it solved a really real problem of we're using way too many resources just to scale up build, because we're also scaling up work item tracking and all the other components that part of that monolith at the same time. So before you go and say, oh, I got to write a microservice architecture, what problem does it solve for you? Do you have to scale up and scale down? Do you have to burst out into other infrastructure? Do you have to run on the edge and in the cloud? If not, maybe you're complicating the situation for no benefit at all. So don't think that you have to write everything as a microservice. If you do, luckily the tooling is getting a lot better. The frameworks are getting a lot better. Steel-toe is a great way if you're doing .NET for you to be able to use a lot of the common frameworks and tools that come from the Spring, because Spring has a lot of great tools, or Eureka and things like that for service discovery and tracking and observability. Well, you can utilize a lot of those same tools by using something like Steel-toe. But again, Dapper is going to make a lot of that stuff unnecessary and make the code that you write really, really simple. Because let's say, for example, you needed to store state, and for whatever reason you wanted to use Redis cache. Your application has no idea that it's using Redis cache. And then if you wanted to switch from Redis cache to Cosmos DB, none of your code actually changes. So writing microservices is going to get easier, but I don't want you to use that as an excuse to always write everything as a microservice just because it's easier. You need to make sure that it's solving a problem for you.
Right. Here's Levon Hovanesyan from local Microsoft office. Can't agree more with you. Probably he always saying the same thing.
Yeah.
To other people. So
For sure.
So I believe that you really deeply related to DevOps stuff. I believe you've been working there. So what is your what do you think? How should companies treat to this technology, or should they always use DevOps stuff, or not always? What you would say about this?
Yeah, so my answer is drastically different than it just was, right? DevOps best practices should be applied always, right? I don't care if it's you writing software by yourself or you writing software on a team of 20 or 100 people, because what I've noticed is it makes me faster as an engineer to do DevOps, even if I'm doing it on my own. Like, I don't want to right click and deploy. I just want to commit code to a repository, go have dinner with my wife, and then 5 minutes later, it's running inside of production, and it's gone through all the unit tests. It's gone through all my security scans. It's verified that everything worked in dev, verified it worked in QA. And it normally sends me an email before it goes to production. Say, hey, everything's green. Do you still want it to go? I'm like, yeah, and I check the button. And the next thing you know, it's all in production. And by doing it by myself, when I go to a team, I'm able to share all these best practices with the team. But if I don't do it at home, it's going to be weird when I do it at work, because I don't do it all the time. But for me, it's second nature. I always write unit test. I always write CI/CD. I always do infrastructure as code, even if I'm the only developer on the product, because the benefits that it brings to me, why would everyone not do this? And I think a lot of reasons people don't do it is because they don't do it often enough. And it's hard, and I stumble. I don't know where to start. If you did it every day, if you did it on every project, it becomes second nature. And setting up CI/CD for me it's as easy as file a new project. It just becomes part of my DNA, part of my muscle memory. Infrastructure as code is something that I'm a huge fan of. And I start laying down the infrastructure of code before I write the software, which is kind of the other way around. A lot of people don't do it that way, but I'm like, no. I want to prove, and I want to make sure that I can actually send a file through my pipeline and see my Kubernetes cluster stand up. Matter of fact, I'm working on one right now. The reason I'm still up tonight is infrastructure as code to make sure that I can spin up an AKS cluster, a storage account, a service bus, and cognitive services. So I have a bicep script. So that's another thing you're going to learn about. You're talking about future. Bicep is the future of ARM. So we're taking ARM, which if you've ever seen ARM, it's nasty mountain of JSON. It's like it's really tough, right? It's a very powerful technology. And when you get this script written, it runs and it's awesome. Writing the script, nightmare. So what Bicep does is Bicep makes it really, really easy to write those JSON files, right? So you don't even write JSON anymore. It's its own DSL, right? So it's a domain-specific language called Bicep that you write a fraction of the code that you used to write. And on the back end is that big, giant JSON that you need to give to Azure so that it can go off and do your deployment. And that's what I was playing with that tonight in Helm tonight, making sure that I could deploy my infrastructure and then run my Helm charts through the infrastructure that I stood up. So I do that first. And then once I know I can stand up dev, QA, and prod, and then I can tear it all down and run my pipeline and dev, QA, and prod stand back up again, that's when I start writing code. And when I start writing code, it literally just starts deploying every single time I deploy it. It's trying to make its way into production, and it's awesome. So I laid a highway to production down, and then I start coding using agile practices. In every sprint, we add new value. And if the product owner likes what they see, they're going to get a notification in their inbox saying, if you liked what you saw, press this button and we're going to deploy it into production. And that's the ultimate of your sprint review, right? When you go to your sprint review, you're supposed to have potentially shippable software. When we go to our sprint reviews, our code is sitting in staging, and we're going to demo from staging. And if the product owner likes it, they're going to press approve, and that stuff's going to go immediately into production. Like, that's the holy grail ultimate.
Wow, that's interesting. That's really interesting. But now I got another question, which honestly, I don't have my version of answer either. So I would be curious to hear it from you. Now, Microsoft owns Azure DevOps, and as well it owns GitHub, which have GitHub Actions and everything related to it. So how to choose which one to use? Use GitHub? Is there any like criteria you should keep in mind? And if you have this, then go with Azure DevOps. And if you have this, then go with GitHub Pages.
Sure.
GitHub Actions.
Yes, for sure. So the first question that you ask yourself is, where is my source code? Right? So if your source code is not in GitHub, GitHub Actions are not an option. right? So if your code is in Bitbucket, if it's in Subversion, if it's in GitLab, if it's in Azure DevOps, if it's in TFVC, Azure DevOps is the only place that you can go and use CI/CD from us and deploy from all those source control systems, right? So that's a very quick question. Where is your source? If it's not in Azure, if it's not in GitHub, then GitHub Actions are not an option. So that just stop the debate, stop comparing everything. Let's just go ahead and get you into Azure DevOps because it's a fantastic product. And if you've ever used it, it has so many bells and whistles, it's incredible. Now, if your code happens to be in GitHub, I would tell you to evaluate Actions because they're right there. Now, Actions are much younger than Azure DevOps. There's not feature parity there yet. There's some things that Azure DevOps still is capable of doing that GitHub Actions doesn't do today. I'm sure eventually they will get there, right? Because a lot of the teams now collaborate together and they're working together to make sure that the two products are still maintained. So my next thing would be is like, yeah, we're in GitHub. Let's go look at GitHub Actions and let's see, does it provide all the features that we need to provide the CI/CD pipeline that we need all the way into production? If the answer is yes, great, go for it. If the answer is no, then you can also get your code into Azure DevOps from GitHub, right? Azure DevOps can get your code from literally anywhere. So if you need features that aren't in Actions, then you're more than welcome to use Azure DevOps with GitHub and pull your code directly from GitHub and use all the bells and whistles that come with Azure DevOps. So to me, it is very easy. Where's your code? If it's not in GitHub, go with Azure DevOps. If it is in GitHub, let's go look at Actions and see if Actions does everything that you need. If it doesn't, then go to Azure DevOps, right? And then, so that's my answer to that, right? It depends. Some people are very happy in GitHub Actions and it does everything that they need it to do, which is great. Other people are a little more sophisticated, mature. I don't know what the word is there, but they are doing a lot more in their pipelines that Actions just hasn't caught up with yet. And until it does, they don't have any choice but to use Azure DevOps.
And I would maybe add that if you happen to plan your project using Azure DevOps, the GitHub didn't have the functionality that Azure DevOps has. So
correct.
That's maybe a point as well.
Yeah, for sure. And if you look at GitHub issues versus Azure boards, they really don't compare, right? Like issues don't compare to Azure boards right now. Azure boards come with Kanban boards and task boards and assignment and capacity planning and sprint planning. It's just this task boards and Kanban boards. It comes with everything, right? So GitHub issues just don't provide that. But GitHub issues are great when you're working on an open source project and you have 45 or 100 collaborators all trying to maintain the product together, right? So again, they both solve similar but different problems. And what's awesome about Microsoft is you get to choose either one, right? There's really no wrong answer. There just might be one answer that fits you better than the other, and that's the one that you need to go with because we're going to support you either way. If you choose Azure DevOps, we're going to support you. If you choose GitHub, we're going to support you. So choose the one that works best for you.
Right. Okay, let's move a little bit about developers. So where's .NET going? What to wait from .NET? So
see, that's going to be a tougher question for me to answer, right? Because I spend a lot more time on the DevOps side, and now that I'm in the incubations team, what I am seeing is a lot more where Azure's going with the Dapper side, with focusing on developers. And what I can tell you, what we're trying to constantly do is make the life of the developer as easy as we possibly can. Like literally, the incubations team that I'm on right now, our mantra is how do we make it easier for developers? We don't want you to have to go learn Helm charts. We don't want you to have to go learn kubectl commands. We want you to be able to utilize the power of Kubernetes, but we don't want you to even know Kubernetes is back there, right? We just basically want you to say, hey, here are my files, and here's the URL. I'd love to see them. And then 5 minutes later, you type in the URL, and there's your application running, right? That's what we're trying to figure out is how can we make it that easy for developers and that easy for operators? But for the actual specific language itself, I can't even venture to know where the language like C# is going, where the framework with .NET's going. I was still happy that it's .NET Core, right? That you can run it anywhere because I have a Mac, I have a Linux machine, and to be able to use the same language on all of them and the same tools, because I always use Visual Studio Code as become my #1 editor. I used to use Visual Studio a lot, and I only bring that out now for WPF or some heavy lifting that I need to do. But the 90% of my time I'm in Visual Studio Code. I'm also in PowerShell, and I'm in .NET. And what's cool is all 3 of those things work on my Mac. They work on my Linux machine because PowerShell runs on all 3 platforms. .NET runs on all three platforms, and Visual Studio Code runs on all three platforms. The only thing that changes is my keyboard, and I hate the Mac keyboard, so I can never type on that thing. But other than that, everything else is exactly the same, which is what I like. So where is .NET going? I think it's going to go with the rest of the company, figuring out ways to make the developer's life as easy as we possibly can.
Okay, next we have Chris from .NET team, so he will clarify more information from that.
Yeah,
but I wonder, what would you suggest for, like, let's separate for new developers, maybe students who are just entering to the industry, and maybe they heard a little bit about the programming. Maybe in our case, in our community, maybe they learned a little bit in front-end stuff and maybe a little bit C++ stuff. So where would you suggest them to go? To what area of technology to focus? So I see you have an answer.
No, that's actually a tough one though, because I just learned Go a couple of weeks ago. Because if you're working with Kubernetes a lot, you're going to be seeing a lot of Go code, and you're going to be writing a lot of Go code. I come from a C background, so my first language was C. Oh, that's not true. My first language was QBasic. I think I was in like the 7th or 8th. They taught me QBasic, and then when I got serious about programming, I bought Teach Yourself C in 21 days, and I bought a compiler, and I was going through the book and taught myself C. And then when I went to Compact, I was writing pretty much nothing but C++ at Compact. And then I moved over to C#. But what I would tell someone to do is learn, this is what I did, learn one language really, really well first. Because when you understand looping, when you understand variables, when you understand if statements and things like that, that's in every language. Right? The way that you ask to do those things is different, but the concepts are the same, right? So that's what you really need to understand is what is the basic fundamentals of how do I write programs? How do I call other functions? How do I set breakpoints? How do I debug and architect an actual system? Once you understand a language, picking up Go is just figuring out the syntax. Picking up Java or another language is like, okay, yeah, I know I need to store a variable. I know I need to compare it to something. And then if it's true or false, I want to do different things to that. That's all the same. So what I would tell someone to focus on is the area that makes them excited. Like, for example, game programming scares me to death, right? The people who are playing those video games, I'm like, no way in the world I would probably be able to write a video game that I play, right? I used to be a big Street Fighter fan. Love the game to death. Don't think I could ever write that particular game. Play Forza, could never write that game. I can write a great microservice, right? I can write a great front end. I can write a great WPF application. So I kind of stuck to where I'm passionate and where I have a lot of fun. And that's what you should do too. Programming is amazing. If you're like me and it's 2 o'clock in the morning and you're amped up like I am because you've been coding all day and you don't want to go to sleep, like then you're doing the right thing, because it's not even like work. I get to play for a job, right? To me, it doesn't feel like I work. I just get to play with my computer all day. And for some reason, people pay me to do that. And it feels like it's a dream sometimes. So if you enjoy programming, I'm happy for you, because it's an awesome, awesome way to have an awesome career. But I don't think I would get too hard up on where should I go and what language should I learn. Just learn one. The other languages are easy. They're all very, very similar. Okay,
so I would ask the second question for the second group, which is maybe a senior C# developer, .NET developer, but only developer. So maybe someone who is interested to expand its career and expand its knowledge base. So what technology would you suggest, like strongly suggest that every developer should know beside like the core development language and
code,
technology?
Right? Yeah, just what do you need to learn besides just writing code? Is that the question?
Mm-hmm.
One of them is being a good teammate. There's a lot of soft skills and people skills that you have to develop. I know a lot of brilliant people that are fantastic programmers that I don't want on my team. Right? They're really, really hard to work with. It's painful. No matter how good they are, they're painful to work with. Don't be that person, right? You want to be the person that is forthcoming with information, shares knowledge. Don't try to hold the knowledge for yourself, right? Because that just makes you hard and difficult to work with. So what I would ask people to do is learn the soft skills, learn how to interact with people, learn how to be helpful to others. Because if you're helpful to others, more people are going to gravitate towards you. Try to be really, really good at your job. Have pride in the code that you write. I think that's really important. The professionalism that you bring to it is also very important. And then the other things that I would do is really go from being a programmer to an engineer, right? Look at the entire problem and solve more than just how do I write this function, but how does this fit into the bigger solution that we're trying to solve for the customer? And I noticed that I had to start obsessing over the customer. Stop writing code that's easy to write. Start writing code that's easy to use. And code that's easy to use was sometimes harder for me to write. I just went through this a week ago. I had a module that I'd created for Dapper. It worked, but you had to log into your MySQL and create a database before you could actually attach it to the component. And that friction there just felt weird to me. Every time I did, I'm like, why am I forcing people to do this? Like, this is going to be hard, especially if you're inside Kubernetes and you deployed it with a Helm chart and you don't even know the password. So now you got to go dig out the password just so that you can connect to it for one operation. So what I did is I went back, and it took me probably like 4 or 5 hours to get it rewritten to where the user doesn't have to do any of that stuff anymore. It was harder for me, but it's a better experience for the end user. And that's what I needed to be focusing on. And a lot of times I see a lot of developers taking shortcuts that kind of check the box so they can say they're done, but it's really a miserable experience for the user. And then they wonder why people don't like using their product, because you took a shortcut, because you weren't worried about how they felt. You were worried about how hard it was going to be for you to write. So again, it's not about just the programming. It's about solving the problem, focusing on your customers, being a good person to work with, sharing knowledge really openly. And then last thing I would probably throw in there is agile development. It's here to stay. So you need to make sure you feel comfortable with the pace that Agile brings, the rituals that Agile brings, to make sure that you're actually able to deliver every 2-3 weeks, right? That you're having shippable code, that you're not just, okay, we're going to get code complete, but then we're going to have another sprint where we test it and another sprint where we polish it and another sprint where we deploy it. No, you should be done with that feature by the end of that sprint that you said you're going to be done with it, and it should be ready to be shipped. And a lot of teams take a while to get to that point, to where they're doing Agile really, really well. And I would focus on making sure you're good at that too.
Nice, good suggestions. So maybe one last thing, since we have a few minutes left.
Sure.
If someone is interested in becoming a DevOps engineer, what would you suggest to those people? And maybe let's say this. Say what is the benefit of being a DevOps engineer, why people would love to be, and then how to be.
Okay.
Many of students would be interested in becoming a DevOps engineer.
One of the reasons I think it would be a good idea to do it is because it's really important. That's why I became so popular, is because it was something that I was passionate about, and all our biggest customers were wanting to talk to me about it. Right? So it made me very popular, made me very valuable, right? So right now it's something that I know very few companies who aren't talking to us about DevOps, how to do it better, how to learn from what we've actually done. So if you're passionate about it, now I wouldn't do it just because it's popular, because there's a lot to know, there's a lot to learn. Every problem you solve is different. There's tools popping up all the time that you have to keep on top of. There's a cultural part to DevOps, not just the tooling part to DevOps. There's a process part to DevOps. So there's a lot to learn. But if you're passionate about it and you're interested in it, then it doesn't feel like work. Otherwise, it's going to feel like work. So if you're lucky enough to a process and how the software gets made and how you ship it into production, how you're going to make sure that it's high quality, how you're going to make sure that there's security involved, if that gets you excited, being a DevOps engineer is a great way to exercise all of those things. And you still get to code sometimes too, which is really nice. So I got passionate about it because I've been a developer, like you said, for almost 30 years. I know how miserable it is to be up late at night when it's not for fun, when you're fighting bugs and the software doesn't work and it's hard to deploy and it's just miserable. But DevOps gets rid of all of that. So it brings the fun back into being a developer. So that's why I think it's important. I would just start reading. Go to DevOps conferences, read the Phoenix Project, which is a great book that kind of gives you the ideas and the overarching. There's lots of good DevOps books out there now. Navigating DevOps Through Waterfalls is a book launch that I was on just the other day because my definition's in there. And there's a lot of good books out there that can kind of show you what to expect, the problems you're going to have to solve, and give you some ideas on how to solve them. So it's just going to be a lot of research of the process and the people part. Focus on that more than the tools, because the tools are going to change and the tools aren't important. It's the people and the process you need to focus on.
Nice. I hope our viewers learn a lot from you. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for taking your time. I know it's late for you, and I appreciate that you're here.
Sure.
I hope we will have another meetings, and you will become a good friend of our community.
Yeah, happy to do so. I'm just glad it worked out. I'm glad you emailed me because I definitely wasn't looking at my calendar, and I'm glad I actually made it on time. So this is awesome.
Nice. So thank you. We will leave you for keeping your code, writing your code. So have a good evening. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Have a good time.
Take care.